Missing and waiting. Kate was a happy and curious girl. She was 19 in 1944. She lived in a small town with many wheat fields. Kate remembered many things from her past. She had grown up with Jack, and they had known each other since they were small children. Even though the world was at war, for the moment their little town felt peaceful. Kate's father owned a small café on the main street. He was kind, but he coughed often. His health had been weak in recent years. Kate wanted to help him as much as she could. She learned to cook simple meals and brew tea for customers. She also remembered running around in the fields with Jack, feeling free. Jack was the son of a farmer on the edge of town. His father grew wheat and raised cows. When Jack was a child, he spent afternoons playing in the fields, often joined by Kate. They chased each other through tall grass, laughing until their stomachs hurt. Their clothes would be dusty, and their parents scolded them, but they did not mind. Sometimes, Kate and Jack pretended to be knights fighting imaginary dragons. Kate held up a wooden spoon and shouted, "I am the brave knight! I will protect this land!" Jack held a broom handle and charged forward. They ran around the big barn behind Jack's house, laughing and shouting. One time, Jack tripped on a rope and fell into a pile of hay. Kate laughed so hard that tears came to her eyes, and she almost lost her balance. "You're the silliest knight ever," she teased. Jack's face turned red, and he pretended to be angry. "Well, at least I'm taller than you," he said. That made Kate laugh even more, and soon Jack was laughing too. Other times, they had silly arguments. Kate liked sweet jam, but Jack insisted that salty butter was better. They would shout, "Jam!" and "Butter!" in playful tones. Their parents heard them from far away and shook their heads, but they smiled because they knew Kate and Jack were just playing. As they grew older, their playful fights continued, but they changed a bit. When Kate was 14 and Jack was 16, they felt closer. Jack stopped calling her Shorty. Kate stopped teasing him about his messy hair. Their bond was deeper than silly arguments. War clouds were gathering. Kate and Jack heard rumors on the radio about battles in far-off places. Soldiers sometimes passed through town. Their parents worried but tried not to show it. When Kate turned 18, she worked more seriously in the cafe. She learned to bake bread and pies, and customers loved her gentle smile. Jack helped his father in the fields and grew strong from lifting heavy sacks of wheat. In his free time, he visited the cafe. He would ask, "Where is my favorite jam?" Kate rolled her eyes but gave him fresh jam anyway. Behind the laughter, there was unease. It was 1944. And soldiers were now stationed near the river. Jack and Kate were no longer just children. They felt the world's troubles creeping into their quiet lives. One summer morning, Kate was making breakfast for her father. He was coughing a lot, and his face looked pale. She gave him warm tea, put a blanket on him and helped him sit in a chair in the cafe. The cafe had to open soon, but she was worried about his health. Just as she was about to open the door, Jack came in quietly. "Kate," Jack said softly, "I can help you today. My father said I can take a break this morning." Kate felt relieved. She smiled gratefully at him. Her father also smiled through his cough. He liked Jack and was thankful for his support. They opened the cafe together. Jack cleaned tables and windows while Kate served coffee and baked bread. Some soldiers walked in, looking tired. Kate greeted them politely and tried not to think about the war. Jack prepared pastries for them. One soldier thanked him and asked about the jam. Jack winked at Kate. She tried not to giggle. Later that afternoon, the cafe was quiet. Jack and Kate were alone near the counter. Jack leaned on it, looking at Kate. "Remember how we used to chase each other in the fields?" he asked. Kate nodded and smiled. "I remember you falling into the hay," she joked. Jack laughed. "Yes, that was embarrassing. But you laughed so hard, you almost fell too." They both smiled, then grew silent. Outside, a military truck rumbled by. Jack's face became serious. "They say more young men will be called to join the army," he said. Kate's heart sank, but she tried to appear calm. "Let's not worry yet," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Over the next few weeks, the war news grew worse. Kate's father's cough became more severe. The town felt quiet and tense. Kate and Jack had fewer moments to laugh. They still teased each other about carrying flour bags or brewing tea, but their laughter felt fragile. One day, Jack got a letter from the government. He had to go to a camp for training. His hands shook as he read it. He knew this day would come, but it still felt sudden. That evening, he went to the cafe to tell Kate. She was closing up, and the lights were dim. Jack's face was serious. Kate set down her broom. "When do you go?" she asked softly. "In 2 days," Jack said quietly. He looked down, then looked into Kate's eyes. "I don't want to leave my parents, or you and your father. But I have to go. It's my duty." Kate held her apron tightly. "Jack, what if—" She paused, her voice shaking. "What if something bad happens to you?" Jack stepped closer. "Nothing bad will happen," he said, trying to sound brave, but his voice was soft. "I will write to you. I will think of you every day." Kate took a deep breath. She thought about their funny fights over jam and butter, and the times they laughed in the fields. Now, everything felt serious. She gave him a small, sad smile. "You will come back, right?" she asked. Jack nodded. "Yes, I promise. I will come back." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Kate whispered, "You have to keep your promise, Jack." Jack smiled a little. "And I want some of your jam when I come back." Kate's smile grew a bit, but her eyes were wet with tears. "Deal," she said softly. The next day was quiet. Kate and Jack spent a few hours by the river, watching the water. Jack held a small pebble. "Remember when we skipped stones?" he asked. Kate nodded. They recalled competing to see whose stone would bounce the most. Jack tossed the pebble, but it barely skipped. He sighed. Kate gently placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent comfort. "You'll do better next time," she said softly. They returned to the café. Kate's father was resting in a chair, looking very tired. Jack knelt beside him. "Sir, I will do my duty, but I promise to write letters," he said. Kate's father patted Jack's arm. He coughed and said, "Come back safe, son. Kate needs someone to argue with." Jack smiled at the gentle tease. Early the next morning, Jack packed a small bag. He said goodbye to his parents and walked to the cafe. Kate waited outside with bread and jam for him. She also gave him a small wooden charm shaped like a wheat stalk. "For luck," she said. Jack thanked her and briefly held her hand. "I'll see you soon," he said, trying to look brave. Kate tried not to cry. After Jack left, Kate felt empty. She opened the cafe every day, served customers, and cared for her father. He was weaker now, coughing through the night. Kate barely slept. She missed Jack's silly remarks and their debates. She missed how he made her laugh, even when things felt frightening. A week later, a letter arrived. Kate's heart raced as she saw the shaky handwriting, Jack's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Jack wrote about his training, the strict officers, and his new bunkmates. He joked, "The food here is so bad, I'd trade my boots for your jam right now." But then his words turned serious. "Dear Kate, today, we dug trenches in the rain. The cold rain hit our faces, and the mud made every step heavy. I thought about the times we played in the rain as kids, laughing and running without a care. But here, the rain feels different. It feels lonely. I miss home, the cafe, and most of all, I miss you. Thinking of those happy days gives me the strength to keep going. Stay safe, Kate." Kate smiled with tears in her eyes. She missed him. She wrote back that evening, telling him about the cafe and the changing leaves. She briefly described her father's condition. She added a small sketch of bread and jam, hoping it would make him laugh. Days turned into weeks. The war news on the radio was grim. More soldiers were sent to the front lines in Europe. Kate sent Jack small parcels with dried fruit or cookies. Sometimes those parcels got lost, but he received some. He wrote back, thanking her for the taste of home. Kate's father's health got worse. He needed Kate's help to sit by the window. His breathing was heavy, and he couldn't work in the cafe anymore. Sometimes Kate found him by the window, staring at the wheat fields with tears in his eyes. She knelt beside him, gently rubbing his back. "I will take care of everything," she promised, though she was worried. One evening, Kate heard a knock on the closed cafe door. She opened it to find a soldier delivering letters. He handed her an envelope with an official stamp. Jack wrote that his unit would soon be sent to a major battle. He was unsure of the location, but believed it would be in France. Her hands trembled as she read his words. She remembered their old fights and imaginary night battles. She pictured him in danger, in a foreign land. She wrote back immediately, begging him to stay safe and remember home and the café. She included a small piece of cloth from her apron as a reminder of her. Winter came, and snow fell on the fields. The café stayed open, though fewer customers came. Kate spent most of her time caring for her father. She made him soup, but he could barely eat. She read him Jack's letters, hoping they would cheer him. Sometimes he managed a faint smile. One cold afternoon, a neighbor ran into the café, calling Kate's name. He said her father was on the floor in the back room. Kate's heart pounded as she rushed to him. She found her father unconscious, his face pale. The neighbor helped carry him to his bed. Kate stayed by his side, holding his hand, tears falling onto the blanket. The local doctor was summoned. He shook his head and said Kate's father was very weak, and there was little more they could do. Kate felt panic welling up inside her. Her mother had passed away many years ago, and now she feared losing her father too. She prayed, wishing Jack were there to comfort her. That night Kate sat by her father's bed, listening to his labored breathing. In his sleep, he murmured about the café and Kate's mother. Once he opened his eyes and said, "I am proud of you. You have grown into a strong woman." Then he coughed violently. Kate squeezed his hand, tears running down her cheeks. A few days later, her father died peacefully in his sleep. The doctor confirmed it in the morning. Neighbors helped arrange a small funeral at the local church. Kate stood by the coffin, feeling lost. She looked at her father's face, remembering how he laughed when she and Jack got into mischief. Now she was alone. She decided to keep the café open to honor her father's memory. She greeted customers with a shaky smile, trying to hide her grief. At night, she roamed the empty kitchen, recalling how her father had taught her to knead dough. She tried not to cry, but tears often came. Weeks went by without any letters from Jack. The radio reported fierce battles in Europe. Soldiers in dusty uniforms passed through town more often. Some were wounded, seeking rest. Kate gave them hot soup or tea, even if they had no money. She thought about Jack every day, wondering if he was safe. Finally, another letter arrived. Jack wrote from France. He was exhausted from marches and fighting. Some of his friends were gone, and he felt scared. But he kept Kate's cloth close, pressing it to his heart when he felt lonely. He remembered their childhood games and jam versus butter arguments. Kate read his words over and over. She quickly wrote back, telling him about her father's passing. She poured her grief into the letter but tried to remain hopeful. She wrote that the cafe was still open and neighbors were helping her run it. She ended with, "Please come back. I miss your silly arguments. I miss the way you laugh." Days turned into months. The war news remained grim. Sometimes Kate stood at the cafe window, staring at the road, expecting Jack to walk in at any moment, smiling, saying, "I'm back. Let's argue about jam again." But he never appeared. She carried on day by day, with quiet determination. One rainy evening, a military car stopped in front of the cafe. A young officer got out, carrying letters. Kate recognized the official seals, and her heart raced. The officer asked for her name, then handed her an envelope. She felt dread wash over her. With trembling hands, she opened it. The words blurred as Kate stared at the letter, her hands shaking. "Missing." The word repeated in her mind, cold and heavy. Her chest felt tight, and it was hard to breathe. She held the chair to keep from falling, her legs weak. The letter slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she thought of Jack, his laugh, his jokes, and the way he always made her smile. She held her apron tightly, whispering, "He's not gone. He can't be." But the room was silent, and the weight of sadness felt like a heavy shadow around her. Kate did not believe that Jack was gone. She told herself he might still be alive, maybe lost or captured. She wrote letters to the army, asking for news. Every day, she checked the mail, hoping for a reply, but nothing came. The silence felt heavy, but she still believed that Jack was somewhere out there. Kate kept working in the cafe to stay busy. She smiled at her customers, but she often looked at the door, hoping Jack would walk in. "You promise," she whispered. "I will wait for you." Months became years. The war finally ended, and soldiers returned home. Kate saw families hugging at the train station. Her heart was full of hope. She asked many people about Jack, but no one knew where he was. One autumn afternoon, an older man came into the cafe. He wore an old army uniform and looked tired but kind. He walked over to Kate and gave her a small notebook. "Are you Kate?" he asked softly. Kate nodded, her heart beating fast. "I was with Jack in the war," the man said, handing her the notebook. "He talked about you often. This notebook contains everything he wanted to say." Kate's hands shook as she opened the notebook. Inside, she saw Jack's handwriting. Each entry began with, "Dear Kate." She read them slowly, tears falling down her face. Jack wrote about his hard days in the war, his dreams of coming home, and his love for her. But the man didn't know what happened to Jack. "I'm sorry," he said. "We lost him during a retreat. Maybe he's alive, but no one knows." Kate held the notebook close to her chest. Her heart felt sad but warm. She didn't have all the answers, but she had Jack's words and his love. That night, under the stars, she made a promise. "Jack, I will wait for you," she said softly. "No matter how long it takes." In her heart, she believed one day the door would open and Jack would walk in, smiling like he used to in the fields when they were young.